calls upon us to treat each other with kindness, with humility and respect. It also beckons for Lahui, the nation, so that we might collectively rise and answer this call of aloha. Velina Mai, welcome. A most warm mahalo nui to Melody Kapilia Loha Mackenzie for beginning us on our journey of what will truly be a memorable evening. I am Noelle Kahanu of the American Studies Department here, and I'm humbled by this opportunity to serve as tonight's MC as we gather to listen to the Spring 2016 Dan and Maggie Inouye Distinguished Chair in Democratic Ideals. Please welcome to the stage Chancellor of the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Robert Blay Roman, as he shares some additional opening remarks.
Aloha kako.
Aloha.
This evening is what makes my job worthwhile. It is events like this that are what a university is about. And in particular, this evening is about what the University of Hawaii at Manoa is about. This evening's presentation is part of the program of the Daniel K. and Maggie Inouye Chair in Democratic Ideals. The Chair in Democratic Ideals engages scholars and public figures dedicated to sharing their knowledges and experiences. Established in 2005, it's held jointly in the William S. Richardson School of Law and in the Department of American Studies. This visiting faculty position emphasizes democratic processes and the importance of public life while enhancing understanding of the unique context of Hawaii, Asia, and the Pacific within the traditional positions of power and influence in the United States. The Dan and Maggie Inouye Distinguished Chair honors two distinguished UH alumni who have shaped America. The late Daniel Inouye himself was a 1950 graduate, American war hero, longtime senior senator from the state of Hawaii, and champion of progressive change. His late wife, Maggie, was a 1946 graduate of the University of Hawaii and an educator who was dedicated to the people of Hawaii and who played a key role in her husband's achievements. So today we not only celebrate the university, our guest, but also Daniel K. and Maggie Inouye for their accomplishments and leadership. So welcome to the Daniel K. and Maggie Inouye Chair Lecture this evening.
Okay, so I have to say that this is a full house, and there are more people waiting outside. So actually, I think that we're gonna let more people come in. So give us a few more minutes.
Hey, Noelle!
So again, if you can raise your hand and let people know, because I think they're letting them in by numbers. because, we didn't, people were mad, this is all social media, this is all getting the word out on campus, and then the paper this morning, and so I just want to give a credit to all of you who came, who shared and spread the word about what a fabulous speaker we have here tonight. So thank you. Credit to all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we can get that show of hands again for the people that are coming in where we have empty seats. Thank you so much.
What did you think of Maya and Noah?
What did I think of them? I thought they were incredibly well spoken.
I thought so too, yeah.
They were really great about kind of sticking to the point and making the point, I guess. It was really cool to see them all that young. Really politically aware and able to communicate really beautifully.
Very impressive. I can't imagine the struggles they have to go through there. It just boggles my mind every time I think
hear
about
these
it.
stories and it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. Even witnessing, difficulties here and other places, it's really hard to imagine. I never question it on a daily basis. And these young people, I don't know how old they are, but they're pretty young. They're certainly younger than me, and they've been living in that situation their entire lives. And still, you can imagine a better way to be living. People are committed to their communities, they're committed to education, and telling their stories. Yeah, it's very inspiring.
In early 2001, I was on the mainland taking some courses at a community college in Illinois, and I
Thank you everyone for bearing with us.
say that
We're gonna get started.
only 12 minutes late. Not too bad.
Okay, we're gonna get started with an introduction by Robert Parkinson. And he is a faculty member of the American Studies Department. Please welcome him for an introduction of our chair.
Aloha.
Aloha.
It is my honor to introduce a speaker who has been introduced in so many ways before. Once by President Nixon, who branded her a dangerous terrorist. Once by Ronald Reagan, who had her removed from her philosophy position not once, but twice. Once by Yoko Ono and John Lennon. Even by the Rolling Stones, who wrote songs about her.
Yeah.
Once by James Baldwin, who penned a eulogy for her when she was in prison in California, facing the gas chamber, in which he vowed to fight for her life as if for his own.
Wow.
In that time, in the twilight of the 60s, as conservatism was ascendant and collided with freedom movements still on fire, Angela Davis became a political and cultural icon. She could have been frozen in that moment in time. Instead, she thought and wrote and spoke and struggled forward. As an academic, Professor Davis has produced a bookshelf of texts influencing fields from American studies to philosophy to ethnomusicology. She has helped found whole intellectual and political movements, third wave feminism, what has become known as intersectionality, critical prison studies. As an activist, Angela Davis has fought for freedom from repression, but also more substantive freedoms, for dignity, resources, opportunity, freedom to thrive, freedom to live. She has spotlighted throughout her life those least in favor. In the Cold War, in Cold War America, she became a communist. She fought for prisoners when law and order was becoming hegemonic. She fought for LBGT justice early. She fights for Palestine still. On many visits to these islands, in which she befriended Haunani K. Trask and many of you in the audience tonight, she has spoken out for the Hawaiian nation. Her words, her messages are as vital today as they were at any time. Since the 1960s, of course, we have seen amazing movement victories. Disability access, environmental protections, albeit insufficient, doors to closets flown open, the selection of a black president. But the structures of violence and injustice that Professor Davis decried at the start of her career, even as a youth in segregated Alabama, remain. Jim Crow may have perished, but America remains separate and unequal. Unions and the Great Society, institutions that mitigated poverty and solidified the middle class have been torn asunder. Wealth has flown upwards. What she calls the prison industrial complex is 10 times larger today than it was when she was in its clutches. War remains a governing logic of American politics. Demagoguery, racist demagoguery, once banished from polite company in America, has returned to presidential politics. We might find all of this disheartening, but I believe, at least to some extent, that Professor Davis does not. Because, as the title of her talk this evening suggests, she has lived freedom as a constant struggle. She has said that we must act as if the world can be radically transformed, even if sometimes it seems that it cannot. She once said that revolution is a lifetime commitment, and more, a commitment to build a better world for children yet unborn. And so, with hopes that we might see glimmers of that world tonight, I give you Angela Davis.
Thank you and aloha.
Aloha.
Let me tell you what an honor it is to be able to spend the next few weeks on the campus of the University of Hawaii, Manoa, as the Dan and Maggie Inouye Distinguished Chair of Democratic Ideals. I feel especially privileged to follow such chairholders as Frederick Weiserman, who was the director of the film Titicut Follies, Ngugi Thiong'o, who is the brilliant Kenyan writer, and John Hope Franklin, the activist historian, the author of the monumental work From Slavery to Freedom. And so I thank the Chancellor, Robert Blake Broman, the Department of American Studies, the Law School, the William J. Richardson Law School, Noel Kahanu, Professor Robert Perkinson, and all of the amazing graduate students from American Studies, the Law School, Women's Studies, Political Science, Sociology, English, and Social Work. Who enrolled in the seminar I am currently teaching with Professor Perkins. Although this is the first time I will have had the opportunity to spend an extended period here in Hawaii, I have visited at least once a decade since the late 1970s. During my first visit to this university, I had the opportunity to meet Mari Matsuda, who of course is now a professor in the law school, but she was still a student at the time. I was invited later to speak at the university by Professor Haunani K. Trask, and had the opportunity to witness the completion of the buildings for the Center for Hawaiian Studies. I should also say that some of my former students are on this campus. I had the opportunity to teach political science. Professor Noelani Goodyear, just a few hours ago, I learned that Ndrogi is in the history department, and I taught him as an undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz. So all of this to say that I feel I have substantial connections with this place. The theme of my talk comes from the title of my latest book, which bears the name of a freedom song from the mid-20th century Black freedom movement. freedom is a constant struggle. They say that freedom is a constant struggle. They say that freedom is a constant struggle. Oh Lord, we've struggled so long, we must be free. We must be free. The other verses evoke crying and sorrow and moaning and dying. They say that freedom is a constant dying. We've died so long, we must be free. I like the irony of the last line of each of the verses. We've struggled so long, we've cried so long, we've sorrowed so long, we've moaned so long, we've died so long, we must be free. There is both critique and inspiration here. We must be free. We must be free. But are we really free? This song was designed to forge community. Freedom emerges from the very process of struggle. And as we attempt to achieve freedom, we discover many new dimensions of the freedom we thought we knew. We transform our sorrow into joy, our pain into pleasure. The very first time I visited Hawaii, the struggle to force the Navy to leave the sacred island of Kaho'olawe had just erupted. And I had the opportunity to meet with quite a number of the activists at that time. There was struggle, there was sorrow, there was moaning, and there was dying. Today, the island is no longer controlled by the military. But freedom is a constant struggle, and the struggle against militarization continues. The struggle here in Hawaii against militarization, the struggle to preserve agricultural lands, the struggle to save this beautiful place in the world from Monsanto. The struggle to protect Mauna Kea. And the struggle against police fire. Of course, people around the world know the names of Mike Brown, Freddie Gray, Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old who was killed in Cleveland. But we should also include Colin Elder. Who was shot and killed by a federal agent some years ago. Freedom is a constant struggle. Every time I have visited Hawaii, there have been reasons to evoke the constant struggle against racism. During the late 1990s, when I was here, John Hope Franklin, whom, as I mentioned before, was one of the holders of the Dan and Maggie and really distinguished chair, he had tried his best to spark what was called then a national conversation on race under the auspices of the Clinton administration. The other Clinton. And you may have noticed that today Clinton is trying to defend his crime bill, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. And perhaps we can talk about that later, but I want to bring up another aspect of his presidency. In 1997, Bill Clinton announced that he was about to, quote, lead the American people in a great and unprecedented conversation about race. Now, people who had followed Clinton's nomination of Lani Guinier to head the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and who were aware of his subsequent withdrawal of the nomination because apparently she was considered to be too radical for that position. They knew that it was actually Lani Guinier who had initially proposed a national conversation on race. She had said, and I quote, "We need new thinking and new approaches to race and racism that move beyond notions of intentional acts of bigotry and prejudice, beyond the claims of legal racial equality that rallied the civil rights movement in the 1960s, away from the claims based on individual guilt and individual innocence." What she was saying then was that we have to learn how to recognize institutional racism and structural racism. Now, John Hope Franklin was named the head of the commission that would organize this conversation. There were major problems from the very outset, although Franklin clearly wanted a deep engagement with the ways in which slavery and colonization had shaped the racisms that remain institutionally embedded in our societies. No indigenous person was named to the commission. And this was much more than an oversight. This meant that we would not be urged to understand the links between slavery and colonization, the ways in which the racist aggression of the post-slavery Jim Crow era was directly connected to the violent annexations of Puerto Rico and Hawaii. In fact, one of the most repressive moments in the racial history of the U.S. took place in Wilmington, North Carolina, the Wilmington, North Carolina massacre of 1898, which means that it took place the same year that Hawaii was annexed, after, of course, the earlier overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom. Historians have reminded us that we are produced by processes that often relegate us as individuals to relative insignificance. And thinking about someone like John Hope Franklin, who was belittled by the failures of the same history of which he was a student, I feel the need to remind myself of the need for what he called a historical-minded people. He said we need more historians, but we also need a historical-minded people. And this historical mindedness, this collective consciousness that is always grounded in history is a very important dimension of freedom. John Hope Franklin received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1995. And within a couple of months of having received this medal, he was confronted by a woman in a hotel lobby in New York who saw this black man standing there and thought he was a custodian and gave him her garbage to dispose of. And then later he said at a hotel in Oklahoma, he was mistaken for a bellhop and was asked to carry a stranger's luggage. So he said in an interview, I laughed at most of these people. How could you take them seriously? But later he said, you have to take them seriously. You have to take them seriously. And he said, I wish I could see what their eyes see. Here's an old man with a nice suit on, no uniform, no accoutrements of servitude. I'd like to understand what it is, Franklin says. I am 82, and they still see me as a boy. He went on to say that without ending slavery, though, and he points out that slavery should have been ended at the founding of what was called the United States of America. Without ending slavery, he said, you couldn't end the idea that black people were inferior. We have been mired by that. We have been so mired down by that ever since. Then he says, people still see me as someone meant to serve. That's a bad way to be in a country that is supposed to be based on the premise that all men are equals. The idea that all people are equal at bottom is the basis of democracy. But the notion of democracy, we have been asked